Keanu Reeves walked into the airport quietly, just like he always did. He had learned long ago that even the simple act of walking through a public place could attract attention, but he had also mastered the art of blending into a crowd. He wore simple clothes, nothing flashy. A dark jacket, jeans, and sunglasses to cover part of his face. He was tired, his body heavy after days of interviews, press tours, and traveling. Airports were not new to him, but they always carried a certain energy, people rushing to flights, families hugging tightly, children pulling on their parents' hands, business travelers typing quickly on laptops. To him, it was just another stop, another journey, another place he had to pass through. But on this day, the airport would become something he would never forget. He carried his bag slowly, not in a hurry. His flight was still hours away. He was thinking about getting a coffee and finding a quiet corner where he could sit without being noticed. But before he could even take that turn toward the cafe, his eyes caught something in the distance. It was like his soul was suddenly pulled out of his body. A woman, walking confidently through the terminal, had caught his attention. He froze. His footsteps stopped so suddenly that a man behind him almost bumped into him. Keanu did not even notice. His heart skipped, then pounded harder in his chest. His hands, usually steady, suddenly felt weak. His bag slipped slightly from his shoulder. He could not believe what he was seeing. The woman looked exactly like her, the woman he had once loved, the woman he had lost. For years, her memory had lived inside him, a quiet shadow that never left. He had accepted that she was gone, that life had taken her too soon, but seeing this stranger walking casually through the airport brought every memory rushing back like a storm. It was not just a passing resemblance. It was not one of those moments where someone reminds you faintly of another person. No. This was deeper. This was haunting. She had the same long hair falling gently over her shoulders, the same soft face, the same delicate smile when she checked something on her phone. Even the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, it was identical. Keanu's chest tightened. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. He blinked, rubbed his eyes behind the dark shades, and looked again. She was still there. Walking, moving, alive. His legs felt heavy, like they were glued to the floor. Around him, life went on. Announcements echoed from the speakers. People pulled suitcases. Children laughed and cried. Cameras clicked as some fans noticed him standing there. But Keanu heard none of it. The world had faded, and all he could see was her. The past and the present blurred together in front of his eyes. His late girlfriend's memory, once safely kept in the corners of his heart, was now standing in front of him in the form of this stranger. He felt a rush of emotions: confusion, sadness, disbelief, and something else he could not name. It was painful but also magnetic. He wanted to look away, to remind himself that this was just a coincidence, just another woman with a face that resembled someone he once knew. But he could not. His eyes refused to let go. His mind raced back to the moments he had shared years ago, the laughter, the small talks, the quiet evenings when everything felt simple and full of hope. Losing her had been one of the hardest things in his life. And now, in the middle of a crowded airport, the wound felt fresh again. The woman walked toward the check-in counter, completely unaware of the storm she had stirred in his heart. She looked calm, like any other traveler ready to catch a flight. Keanu felt torn. Should he approach her? What would he even say? He knew it was impossible that she was the same person. Life had taken that chapter away from him long ago. And yet, every part of him screamed that he could not just let her walk by. The thought of losing sight of her felt unbearable. He took a small step forward, then stopped again. His breathing grew uneven. People were starting to notice that Keanu Reeves, the quiet actor everyone admired, was standing still in the middle of the airport looking completely shaken. Phones were raised. Cameras clicked. But he did not care. For him, this was not about fame, not about being watched. This was about a memory that had come alive in front of his eyes. This was about love, loss, and something he did not yet understand. He remembered the last conversation he had with his late girlfriend. The softness of her voice. The warmth of her hand. The way she had looked at him when they talked about the future. And then he remembered the emptiness that followed after she was gone. That empty chair, that silence, that ache in the chest that nothing could fill. For years, he had carried that pain quietly, never showing too much, always keeping it private. He had moved forward in life, built his career, given kindness to others, but the wound was always there, quietly resting beneath the surface. And now, in this unexpected place, the wound was open again. The woman bent down to adjust her bag, her hair falling across her face in the exact same way he remembered. Keanu felt his knees weaken. He reached for the nearest pillar to steady himself. A part of him wanted to turn and leave, to protect himself from more pain. But another part of him whispered that maybe, just maybe, there was a reason for this moment. Maybe life had brought him here not just to remind him of his grief, but to show him something else. He stood there for a long moment, frozen in disbelief. Time seemed to move slowly. He could hear his own heartbeat louder than the airport announcements. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. He wanted to call her name, the name of the one he had lost, but he knew it was not her. This was someone else. Still, his heart refused to believe it completely. The woman began walking toward the airport cafe. Keanu's eyes followed her, his steps still frozen to the ground. He felt as if he had been given a choice. Either he could let her go and carry this ghostly image in his heart forever, or he could follow her, speak to her, and at least understand who she was. His fingers gripped the strap of his bag tighter. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. Keanu Reeves, a man admired for his calmness and strength, stood at that airport looking fragile, human, and lost in memories. He knew this was only the beginning of something unexpected. His story for the day had already changed. What had started as just another journey through an airport was now a moment that shook him deeply. He had frozen in time, standing between the past and the present, unsure of where to go next. Keanu's legs finally moved, almost without his permission. He began walking slowly in the same direction as the woman, his steps careful, his body tense with a mixture of fear and hope. The airport crowd was thick, people rushing to flights, families chatting loudly, security officers checking bags, but Keanu barely noticed any of it. His eyes were fixed on her. Every time she adjusted her scarf, every time she glanced at her phone, it reminded him of someone he had loved so deeply. His heart, still heavy with old pain, now beat faster with curiosity and longing. He did not want to lose sight of her. He kept a respectful distance, never too close. He wasn't sure what he would do if she suddenly turned and noticed him. How could he explain himself? "Hello, you look like someone I lost years ago." The thought felt strange, almost foolish. But at the same time, he knew he couldn't just let this moment pass by without knowing more. His mind battled with his heart. Logic told him this was just a coincidence, but emotions told him that there was something important about this meeting, something bigger than just resemblance. The woman walked toward the cafe near the boarding gates. She found a small table by the glass window and placed her bag down. She looked out at the airplanes lined up outside, their tails shining under the sun. Keanu stopped near the entrance, watching her from afar. He could see her profile now, the way her jaw curved, the way her lips moved slightly as if she were humming to herself. His chest tightened again. He leaned against the wall, pretending to check his own phone, but his attention never left her. People started whispering around him. A few travelers realized who he was. Keanu Reeves, standing in the middle of the airport, looking shaken, wasn't something you saw every day. Some took out their phones, snapping pictures discreetly. He didn't care. For once, the world of fame meant nothing to him. What mattered was the stranger who carried the face of his past love. Minutes passed, but they felt like hours. Keanu debated silently with himself. Should he go talk to her? What if she thought he was strange? What if she was annoyed? He had always been private, always careful not to impose on strangers. Yet here he was, standing frozen, unable to walk away. He thought about all the times he had chosen silence in his life, all the moments he had let pass without speaking up. This time, he didn't want regret. The woman ordered a coffee and opened a book from her bag. She began reading, sipping slowly, her fingers brushing lightly against the pages. Keanu swallowed hard. The sight was so familiar. His late girlfriend had loved books, too. She used to carry one everywhere, opening it in cafes, buses, parks, even while waiting for him on set. Seeing this stranger do the same thing almost broke him. Finally, he decided. He could not leave without at least saying a word. He took a deep breath, straightened his jacket, and walked toward her table. Each step felt heavier than the last. He could hear the sound of his shoes on the tiled floor, hear the chatter of people fading into the background. His palms grew slightly damp. He reached her table and stopped. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. For a brief second, the world stopped again. Keanu froze, just like before, caught in her gaze. Her eyes were warm, kind, curious. They weren't exactly the same as the woman he had lost, but the similarity was enough to shake him. His voice caught in his throat. "Hi, may I sit here?" he asked softly, almost whispering. The woman blinked, surprised. She recognized him, of course almost everyone did. But what surprised her more was the gentleness in his tone, the way he asked instead of assuming. She nodded with a polite smile. "Of course," she said, moving her bag slightly to make space. Keanu sat down slowly, his hands resting on the table, trying to steady himself. For a moment, neither spoke. He glanced at her book, then at her coffee. She noticed his quiet stare and tilted her head slightly, as if waiting for him to say something. "Thank you," he said, finally breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but inside he was still trembling. She smiled again, softly. "You're welcome." Keanu wanted to ask her name, where she was from, who she was traveling to meet. But he held back, afraid of sounding too eager. Instead, he pointed gently to her book. "That's a good one," he said, recognizing the author. Her face lit up with surprise. "You've read it?" "A while ago," he replied. "It's a thoughtful story." She nodded, her eyes sparkling a little. "I'm enjoying it so far. I always bring a book when I travel. Makes the waiting less lonely." Those words struck him deeply. His late girlfriend had once said almost the exact same sentence. The echo of the past was so sharp, Keanu felt his throat tighten. He tried to stay composed, sipping the glass of water a waiter had placed on the table. The woman introduced herself after a few more minutes of casual talk. Her name was different, unfamiliar to him. She was from another country, here to visit family. She talked about her flight being delayed, about how she used this chance to relax with coffee and a good book. Keanu listened carefully, every word carving a strange line in his heart. He wanted to tell her everything, that she reminded him of someone he had loved and lost, that her presence today felt like a gift and a wound at the same time. But he stayed quiet, not wanting to burden her with his emotions. Instead, he asked simple questions. Where was she headed? What did she do for work? She answered kindly, her tone calm and open. She worked in education, helping young students learn. Her eyes lit up when she talked about her job, and Keanu found himself smiling softly. The passion in her voice was comforting. As their conversation continued, he noticed little details. The way she held the cup with both hands, the way she laughed quietly at her own stories, the way she leaned forward when listening. All of it mirrored memories he thought were long buried. Every gesture was like a whisper from the past, reminding him of what he once had. But he also realized something important. She was not the same person. Her life, her stories, her energy were her own. This was a new human being, a stranger who just happened to carry a face that mirrored his old love. The more he listened, the more he understood that truth. It made the encounter bittersweet. At the same time, Keanu noticed how kind she was. She didn't seem bothered by his presence, even though he was famous and could have made her feel uncomfortable. Instead, she treated him like any other person, sharing pieces of her life with ease. That small kindness warmed him, even as the ache in his chest remained. The cafe around them filled with more travelers, the sound of luggage wheels rolling by, the faint hum of announcements about delayed flights. But at their table, it felt quiet, almost peaceful. Keanu leaned back slightly, watching her as she spoke, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a strange mix of sorrow and gratitude. For the first time in years, he felt close again to the one he had lost. Not because this woman was her, but because life had placed a reflection in front of him, reminding him that love, once real, never fully disappears. Even in the face of grief, it lingers in unexpected forms. He still hadn't told her what he was truly feeling. But he knew he couldn't leave the airport without at least saying something. The thought grew stronger with each passing minute. The more Keanu sat at that small airport cafe table, the more he felt the weight of unspoken words pressing on his chest. He had listened to her stories, nodded politely, and added little comments now and then, but deep inside, he was carrying a storm. Every laugh of hers, every small gesture, every quiet pause, it reminded him of a woman he had loved so deeply, a woman no longer in this world. He knew he could not sit there pretending forever. His heart was restless, almost aching, telling him he needed to speak. He needed to at least acknowledge what this moment meant to him. He looked at her carefully. She was sipping the last bit of her coffee, her eyes scanning a page of her book. Her hair fell lightly over her cheek, and she tucked it behind her ear in that same familiar way. Keanu took a breath. His hands rested on the table, steadying himself. He did not want to frighten her or make her feel uncomfortable. She was a stranger, after all. But he also knew he would regret it forever if he walked away without saying what was in his heart. "You know," he said quietly, his voice softer than usual, "you remind me of someone I once knew." She looked up at him, her eyebrows raising slightly, curiosity in her expression. "Oh? Someone important?" Keanu hesitated. His throat tightened as memories rushed back again. "Yes," he said after a pause. "Very important. Someone I lost a long time ago." Her expression softened. She didn't push for details, but she leaned forward just a little, her eyes filled with understanding. "I see," she said gently. "I hope it's not painful for you to say that." Keanu managed a small smile, though his eyes betrayed the heaviness in his heart. "It is painful," he admitted, "but it also feels like a gift. Sitting here, talking to you, I feel as if life is reminding me of something I thought was gone." She tilted her head, her lips curving into a kind smile. "That's a beautiful way to put it." She paused, then added softly, "Sometimes the world surprises us with mirrors of our memories." Her words touched him deeply. For a moment, he had no reply. He simply looked at her, grateful that she had met his vulnerable truth with kindness instead of awkwardness. He realized then that this woman, though a stranger, carried a kind spirit of her own. It wasn't just her face that reminded him of the past, it was her presence, her calmness, her gentle way of listening. The cafe around them continued to fill with the noise of travelers, the clinking of cups, the constant announcements about boarding. Yet Keanu felt as if the two of them were in a quiet bubble, untouched by the chaos. He leaned back slightly, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For the first time since he had seen her in the crowd, he felt less like a man haunted by the past and more like a man gifted with a rare moment of peace. She closed her book and placed it back into her bag. "I didn't expect to have a conversation like this today," she said with a small laugh. "Airports are usually just loud and tiring." Keanu nodded. "Me neither," he admitted. "But sometimes unexpected meetings stay with us more than the planned ones." They both smiled quietly at that. For a while, their conversation turned lighter. They talked about travel, about how she loved visiting new countries to experience different cultures, and how Keanu, because of his work, had seen more airports than he could count. She teased him about how tiring it must be, and he chuckled softly, saying he had learned to sleep almost anywhere. She talked about her students and how they often made her laugh with their innocence. He listened, feeling comfort in the normalcy of the exchange. But inside, the pull of the past was still strong. Every now and then, he caught himself staring at her too long, noticing tiny details that mirrored his late girlfriend: the way her hands moved when she spoke, the way her eyes widened when she was amused, even the quiet pauses she took before answering a question. He tried not to let the sadness overwhelm him, but it lingered like a shadow. At one point, the woman leaned back and looked at him carefully. "You seem thoughtful," she said gently. "Is something on your mind?" Keanu gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "I guess I am," he admitted. "It's just, you really do remind me of her. Not just the way you look, but the way you carry yourself." She smiled softly, though there was a touch of sadness in her eyes, as if she understood the depth of his words. "I hope that's a good thing," she said. "It is," Keanu replied quickly, his voice firm. "It's a good thing. It hurts, yes, but it also feels like a reminder that love, once felt, never truly leaves us. It stays, in unexpected places, in unexpected faces." Her eyes glistened a little, and she nodded slowly. "That's true. I believe that too." For a moment, silence fell between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke louder than words, a silence filled with respect, with unspoken understanding, with something rare and fragile. Then she glanced at the screen above the cafe counter. "Oh," she said softly, "my flight will start boarding soon." She began gathering her things, slipping her book into her bag, pulling her scarf closer around her shoulders. Keanu felt a pang in his chest, knowing their time together was coming to an end. He wanted to say more, to hold on to the moment just a little longer. But he also knew that life worked in its own mysterious ways. Maybe this meeting was not meant to last, maybe it was meant only as a brief reminder, a spark of memory to carry forward. As she stood, Keanu rose as well. He looked at her, his eyes soft but filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply. "For this conversation. For reminding me." She gave him a warm smile, one that carried both kindness and a touch of mystery. "Thank you too," she replied. "For listening. And for sharing." They stood there for a second longer, then she extended her hand. He took it gently, holding it for a moment longer than a normal handshake. His eyes met hers, and though no words were spoken, there was an understanding between them. She wished him peace with her gaze, and he silently wished her joy in return. Then she turned, walking toward her gate. Keanu watched her go, each step pulling her further into the crowd. He stood still, his chest heavy yet strangely light at the same time. He knew he would likely never see her again. But he also knew that this moment would stay with him forever. As she disappeared into the sea of travelers, Keanu closed his eyes briefly and let out a long breath. He felt tears pressing behind his eyelids, but he held them back. He wasn't sad exactly. He was grateful. For once, life had given him not pain, but a strange comfort. A reminder that love doesn't vanish. It echoes, it returns, sometimes in the most surprising places, like an airport cafe on an ordinary afternoon. Keanu remained seated for a few moments after she walked away, his eyes following her until she blended into the stream of passengers heading toward the boarding gates. His chest felt heavy, yet lighter than before. It was as if he had been carrying a hidden stone inside him for years, and meeting her had shifted it slightly, allowing him to breathe a little differently. He looked around the cafe, realizing how surreal the last half hour had been. He was supposed to be just another traveler passing through, but instead he had found himself in the middle of an unexpected emotional journey. When he finally stood up, he walked slowly to the glass wall that overlooked the runway. Planes moved gracefully outside, preparing for takeoff. Keanu pressed his hand lightly against the cool glass and stared. The reflection of the woman lingered in his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that life had given him a rare gift, even if only for a short time. He closed his eyes, replaying their conversation. The way she smiled, the way she listened without judgment, the way she carried herself, it all reminded him of something he once held dear. He eventually turned and walked back through the terminal. People glanced at him, some smiled nervously, others whispered. He gave them small nods, polite but distant. His mind was elsewhere. He wandered slowly until he found himself near a quieter corner of the airport. A bookstore stood there, filled with rows of novels, magazines, and travel guides. He stepped inside, more out of instinct than intention. Inside the bookstore, he ran his fingers along the spines of books without really reading the titles. He thought about how his late girlfriend had always loved bookstores. She used to tell him that bookstores felt like safe havens, full of worlds waiting to be discovered. She would spend hours browsing, smiling as she picked up one book after another. Seeing this woman at the cafe reading a novel had been like watching a page of that memory come alive again. He felt warmth in his heart, mixed with sadness. As he browsed, a little girl ran past him and accidentally bumped into his leg. She looked up with wide eyes and said, "Sorry," before running back to her mother. Keanu smiled faintly, watching her go. That simple moment grounded him. It reminded him that life was always moving forward, full of people and stories, each person carrying their own world of memories and dreams. He realized he wasn't alone in carrying grief. Everyone had something, some loss or pain, yet everyone kept walking. He picked up a small book from the shelf, not even checking the title at first. When he glanced down, he noticed it was about journeys, about finding meaning in unexpected places. He chuckled softly at the coincidence. Life seemed to be speaking to him through every detail today. He bought the book and carried it with him as he walked back toward his gate. When he arrived, he noticed the crowd forming in the waiting area. He looked around, half hoping to catch one last glimpse of her, the stranger who had reminded him of so much. And then, across the seating rows, he saw her again. She was sitting quietly, headphones on, scrolling through her phone. She looked calm, unaware of the effect she had left on him. Keanu's breath caught for a second, but then he smiled softly. This time, he didn't freeze. He simply watched for a moment, feeling gratitude rather than shock. Their eyes met briefly when she looked up. She gave him a polite smile, and he returned it with the same warmth. Neither spoke. The moment was enough. It was an unspoken goodbye, a silent acknowledgement that what had happened between them at the cafe was something meaningful, even if it was only for a short while. When her flight was called, she stood and walked toward the boarding gate. Keanu stayed where he was, watching her blend into the line of passengers. He wanted to walk over, to say something more, but he stopped himself. He knew that sometimes words were not necessary. Sometimes silence carried more meaning. She turned once, perhaps by accident, and their eyes met again. This time, Keanu lifted his hand slightly in a small wave. She gave him one last smile before turning and stepping onto the plane. As the gate closed behind her, Keanu sat down with a deep sigh. He opened the book he had just bought, flipping through the first few pages. He wasn't really reading. His mind was still on her. He felt as if the universe had given him a reminder that even in loss, there could be light. That love, once felt, could echo in the most unexpected ways. Minutes passed before his own flight was announced. He stood, gathered his things, and walked slowly toward his gate. As he moved, he thought about what had just happened. It wasn't a chance for reunion, it wasn't fate bringing back the past. It was something quieter, something gentler. It was life reminding him that memories didn't have to weigh him down. They could also lift him up, give him comfort, and guide him forward. When he boarded his plane, he settled into his seat by the window. The engines hummed, and the flight attendants prepared the cabin. Keanu leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. He thought about how fragile life was, how quickly it could change. He also thought about how beautiful it was that people could reflect pieces of others we had loved. That resemblance didn't erase the pain, but it could soften it, turning grief into something less sharp, more tender. As the plane began to move, he opened his eyes and looked out the window. The airport lights flickered, the runway stretched ahead, and he felt a strange peace. For years, he had carried his grief silently, thinking it was only his burden. But today, in a crowded airport, life had given him a moment of recognition, a moment that reminded him he wasn't alone. He smiled faintly, a smile touched with both sadness and gratitude. He thought of the woman now, sitting on her own flight, unaware of just how much she had meant to him in such a short time. She had no idea that she had given him something priceless, a chance to feel close again to someone he thought he had lost forever. That, he realized, was enough. The plane lifted into the sky, and Keanu stared at the clouds outside. His thoughts were calmer now, his heart lighter. The memory of the cafe conversation would stay with him. It would remind him that grief was not just about endings, it was also about remembering the love that had been real, and finding ways it still lived on. For the first time in a long while, Keanu allowed himself to rest, not just physically but emotionally. He leaned his head back, closed his eyes, and let the hum of the plane carry him into a quiet space. A space where love and memory could exist together, not as pain, but as something softer, something almost healing. Keanu sat quietly in his airplane seat as the engines hummed, carrying him into the sky. The city lights below grew smaller until they looked like tiny dots scattered across the dark ground. He rested his head back against the seat, closing his eyes for a moment. The memory of the woman at the airport was still fresh, every detail of her face, her laugh, her calm voice lingering in his thoughts. He felt like he had just lived through a scene he would never be able to explain fully to anyone else. It was too personal, too tied to his heart. As the plane moved higher, Keanu thought about the strange way life worked. He had come to the airport expecting nothing more than a long wait and a simple flight. Yet, in those crowded halls, he had been given something rare, a reflection of his past, a reminder of love, and a chance to say goodbye in a way he never thought possible. He did not believe in coincidences entirely. To him, it felt like the universe had quietly whispered to him, giving him comfort when he needed it most. The flight was calm. Passengers around him watched movies, read magazines, or tried to sleep. Keanu leaned against the window, watching the clouds float below. He thought about his late girlfriend, the life they had shared, and the dreams they once had. For years, that memory had been a painful shadow in his life. But now, after meeting that woman in the cafe, the memory felt softer. It still hurt, but it no longer crushed him the way it once did. It was as if the stranger had carried a piece of light into his grief, turning it into something gentler. Hours later, when the plane landed, Keanu gathered his things and walked slowly out into the night air. The cool breeze touched his face, and he breathed deeply. He felt calmer, lighter. The airport behind him had become more than just a place of travel, it had become a place of transformation, a moment where the past and present touched for a brief second. Over the next few days, as he continued with his schedule, Keanu carried the memory with him. On film sets, during interviews, or while walking down the street, he would sometimes pause and think of her, the stranger who looked like the love he had lost. He wondered if she thought of their meeting too, if she told her family about the odd but gentle conversation she had with him at the airport. He hoped she did, but even if she never remembered him, he knew he would remember her. One evening, sitting alone in his home with a cup of tea, Keanu opened the small book he had bought at the airport bookstore. The first chapter spoke about journeys that change people in quiet ways. He smiled faintly. The book felt like it had been waiting for him, like a quiet message from life itself. He read slowly, and as he turned each page, he thought again about how grief can shape a person. He had carried his loss for so long, and yet now he felt he could carry it differently, not as a wound, but as a memory of love. Days turned into weeks. Keanu found himself telling a close friend about the encounter. He didn't share every detail, but enough to explain the impact it had on him. His friend listened and said softly, "Sometimes life sends us echoes. Maybe that was yours." Keanu nodded. It was true. That moment at the airport had been an echo of the past, but also a reminder of the future, that even after loss, life had ways of surprising us, of showing us light again. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that his meeting with her wasn't about replacing the love he had lost. It wasn't about pretending she was the same person. It was about understanding that love, once experienced, lives forever inside us. It comes back in unexpected ways, through kindness, through memories, through strangers who remind us of what we once held dear. That realization gave him peace. One afternoon, while walking through a park, Keanu saw a young couple sitting on a bench, laughing together, their hands intertwined. For a moment, he felt the ache of what he had once lost. But instead of sadness overwhelming him, he felt something different this time. He felt gratitude. Gratitude that he had known love so deep, so real, that it could still echo inside him years later. Gratitude that he had been reminded of it at the airport. Gratitude that even in grief, he had found a moment of peace. He sat on another bench nearby, watching the trees sway gently in the breeze. Children ran across the grass, chasing after a ball, while their parents cheered them on. The scene was ordinary, yet it filled him with warmth. Life, he thought, was made of these small, simple moments. And sometimes, it was in these ordinary spaces that the deepest healing happened. As the sun began to set, Keanu reflected on his journey. He had lived through loss, through pain, through years of silence about his grief. But he had also lived through kindness, through unexpected meetings, through reminders that love never really dies. He realized he didn't need to hold on to the heaviness anymore. He could carry the memory as a gift instead of a burden. That night, before going to bed, he wrote in a small notebook he sometimes kept by his bedside. He didn't write often, but tonight he felt the need. He wrote about the woman at the airport, about the way she looked, the way she listened, the way she unknowingly gave him comfort. He wrote about how that meeting had changed him, softened him. He ended with a simple sentence: "Love never disappears. It changes form, but it always lives on." He closed the notebook and placed it on the table beside his bed. For the first time in a long time, he slept peacefully, his dreams calm and quiet. In the weeks that followed, Keanu continued his work, his travels, his life. But something inside him had shifted. He smiled more often. He felt lighter in his conversations. And though he still carried the memory of his late girlfriend, it no longer held him back. It guided him forward instead. Whenever he passed through an airport again, he found himself glancing around, half expecting to see her face in the crowd. He knew he wouldn't, but the thought no longer hurt him. Instead, it reminded him that the world was full of unexpected moments, full of echoes of love, full of reminders that healing was possible. Keanu Reeves, a man known for his quiet strength, had discovered something powerful in that ordinary airport cafe. He had discovered that grief, while painful, could be softened by kindness. That love, even when lost, could return in the most surprising ways. And that sometimes, all it takes is a stranger with a familiar smile to remind us that the heart, though scarred, can still feel warmth again. And so, as he moved forward, he carried the memory not as a shadow, but as a light. A light that would guide him, comfort him, and remind him always that love, once real, never truly fades. It simply changes the way it stays with us.